Good morning, my friends. It was so good to see you all yesterday. Oh my goodness, it made me happy. Oh, I miss your faces and seeing you in person. I am glad we have Zoom though, so we can see each other a little bit, but it sure was good to see you. All right, chapter 11. Chapter 11. Catherine had barely started down the stairs with Louise the next morning when she heard Dr. Whitman in the sitting room below say in a firm voice, "If you want the girls, I want the boys." "Marcus, I don't see how I can take them." "Just for the winter?" A long pause, then, as if with great reluctance, "All right, just for the winter. Thank you, wife." Catherine wanted to rush down the stairs, throw her arms around Dr. Whitman's neck, and thank him. However, she was still too much in awe of Mrs. Whitman to do such an impulsive thing, so she walked soberly into the kitchen and said nothing about what she had heard. All during breakfast, she waited for the doctor to make the announcement, but he and Captain Shaw seemed to have too much to talk about. Children were to be seen and not heard. So she could not even ask a question that would lead to the subject of the boys' future. The captain ate heartily of the fine beefsteak. "Good meat. You raise your own cattle, Dr. Whitman?" "Of course. We raise everything we can except sugar, molasses, and a few other things we buy at Vancouver. We get fish and berries from the Indians. We grind our own wheat and corn. Perhaps you noticed the grits mill. We do not bolt the flour. We think the whole grain is more healthful. That is why our bread is dark." "I like it. How long have you lived here?" 8 years next December," Dr. Whitman replied. "It is amazing what you have done in such a short time. I never expected to see a large house like this one here in the wilderness. Is it built of logs? The way it is plastered over, I couldn't tell." The doctor laughed. He laughed easily, Catherine noticed. "I only wish we had logs, but there is very little timber here in the Walla Walla Valley. We cut enough logs up the mountain for the window frames, doors, and floors, but most of the house is built of adobe brick. Fortunately, we found plenty of suitable clay here. We make the bricks in forms and dry them in the sun." "Sounds like a lot of work," Captain Shaw observed. "Everything here is a lot of work. I need all the help I can get." He turned quickly to the boys who had been sitting with their eyes on their plates, eating hardly anything. "John, Frank, would you like to stay here and be my helpers this winter?" The boys glanced from one man to the other, then to Mrs. Whitman, as if they suspected a joke. "Do you mean it, Dr. Whitman?" John asked incredulously. "Indeed I do." Smiles replaced the sadness in the boys' faces, and Captain Shaw leaped from his chair to shake hands with the doctor. "This is wonderful. You will never regret it." "I trust not, Captain Shaw," Dr. Whitman said soberly. "Since the children's parents appointed you their temporary guardian, I believe we should make a written agreement. Let us put down that my wife and I will keep them until spring. If by that time they are not contented here, or we are not pleased with them, I'll bring them to you in the Willamette Valley. If they do like us and we like them, I shall take legal charge of them on my own responsibility." He paused a moment, then added, "Whether the board will make an allowance for them or not." "Thank you both," said the captain. "This is what Henry and Naomi Sager wanted, especially that the children be kept together. Come out to see us whenever you are in the valley." Catherine knew that the last link with their old life and with their parents was about to be cut. She managed to keep from crying, but Elizabeth burst out loud wails and threw herself at Dr. Dagon's arms. Matilda and Louise wrapped themselves around his legs and would not let go. "Come, come, children, this won't do," Mrs. Whitman said. You want Dr. Daggett and Captain Shaw. You want Dr. Daggett and Captain Shaw to remember you crying? Elizabeth hung her head, and Mrs. Whitman laughed and slipped an arm around her shoulders. We'll get along all right, won't we, Elizabeth? Any chance of my borrowing a horse for Doc here? Captain Shaw asked. I don't know how we'll get it back to you from our camp over on the Umatilla, but... No trouble, Dr. Whitman broke in. Leave it with Stickus, my best Indian friend. He will see it gets back to me. And then they were gone. That afternoon, Mrs. Whitman and the girls were in the kitchen when a knock came at the door. A woman who looked careworn and dirty thrust a small, sodden bundle into Mrs. Whitman's arms. It's my turn to nurse her, but I ain't got enough milk for my own babe. I heard you took the rest of them, children, so I brung her here. She turned on her heel and quickly walked down the path. Mrs. Whitman lay back a corner of the filthy blanket. A tiny face, like that of a sad old woman, looked up at her. Catherine, who had limped across the room, cried, "It's our baby, and she isn't dead." That was Mrs. Eads. She hobbled along the path calling, "Mrs. Eads, Mrs. Eads, wait!" The woman turned and waved but did not stop. "She wouldn't wait," Catherine said when she came back. "I wanted to thank her. Oh, Rosanna, you're still alive." Mrs. Whitman sat down with the dirty bundle in her lap and the children crowded around. "She smells awful," Elizabeth said, holding her nose. Louise struck at the baby, but Catherine drew her away. "That's our little sister. Will you help take care of her so she'll get well?" "No!" Louise stamped her foot. "John won't like it if you don't help me." At the mention of John, Louise thought thoughtful. "I help." "Catherine, would you hold the baby a minute?" Mrs. Whitman said. "The first thing we must do is give her some milk. I wish we had a nursing bottle, but perhaps she will drink from a cup." She brought milk from the pantry and held the cup to the blue lips. The baby swallowed frantically. Then up came all she had taken. So she spit up all that went down. She is even worse off than I thought. A bath will make her more comfortable. Then we'll try again." Marianne, who had been watching intently, hurried to fill a basin with warm water from the kettle on the stove and to bring a dish of soft soap. After stripping off the baby's soiled wrappings, Mrs. Whitman let her down gently into the warm water, the first real bath she had ever had. Her wizened face screwed then into a wail. Then, as she felt the comfort and warmth, she stretched her thin little legs and arms. "Look, she smiled," Catherine said. Mrs. Whitman lifted the tiny body to a clean towel laid on her lap. She let Catherine hold her again while she herself went to the bedroom to bring out some of Alice's baby things, carefully laid away 5 years ago when the little girl had died. Clean and dressed in soft clothing, the baby looked more human. "How old is she?" asked Mrs. Whitman. Catherine brought Mama's Bible to show the page where the names and ages were written. Rosanna's entry was dated May 31st, 1844. 5 months. No bigger than most babies at 3 weeks. It's a miracle she is alive. She brought a little more warm milk in a cup, dipped in one finger, and let a few drops fall into the tiny mouth. The baby sucked the finger as if she would never let go. "Catherine, keep watch of the time. In an hour, if she keeps this down, give her a few more drops. Can you do that so I can take care of other things?" "Oh, yes," Catherine replied. Mrs. Whitman laid the baby in the cradle, and soon she was asleep. Catherine sat beside her with her knitting, joy surging up inside her. Now she could really do something for her baby sister. The new teacher, Mr. Hinman, was given the extra bedroom next to the kitchen and joined the family for meals. He was a short, chunky man with long, dark hair and light, colorless eyes. Catherine felt afraid of him before he had spoken a word, but Mrs. Whitman seemed charmed with him. She kept him next to her at the table and included him in her prayers. Before this, Catherine had looked forward to school. Now she dreaded it. She began to feel terribly alone as well. Frank and John were gone all day helping the doctor, and her sister seemed happy playing with the 3 half-Indian youngsters out in the yard. She could not run and play because of her lame leg, so she was left to watch the baby. She loved Rosanna, she kept telling herself, but outside was beautiful, warm Indian summer weather, though it was November. Catherine had always loved the fall, and she longed to be romping with Elizabeth instead of sitting here giving the baby a few drops of milk every hour. She became so miserable that she cried if anyone looked at her. "What's the matter with you, Katie?" John asked. "We're all together." "I know, but everything is so awful without Mama and Papa." It was Mrs. Whitman who helped her the most. "I have had bad times too, Catherine. Sometimes I go off by myself and cry." "You do?" "Yes, I do. You see, I have always had a quick temper, and sometimes it gets away from me. I say things I'm sorry for later. That is when I feel so bad, I cry." Looking up at the calm, smiling face, Catherine could hardly believe that sometimes it was bathed in tears like her own. "Don't tell anyone I told you this. I try to keep it a secret," Mrs. Whitman told her. "I won't." She did not tell anyone, but the little conversation had brought her closer to her new mother. She never quite felt so lonely again. A few evenings later, the family happened to be alone. No immigrants came to the door, and there were no Indians needing food or medicine. Even Mr. Hinman was in his room to study. A delightful sense of peace settled over the living room, where the fire crackled in the fireplace. Dr. Whitman relaxed in a comfortable chair, Matilda on his lap. Catherine and Elizabeth sat on each side of Mrs. Whitman on the settee, all 3 knitting, while with one foot Mrs. Whitman rocked the cradle where tiny Rosanna lay sleeping. Already her little face had begun to fill out, and she looked like a baby instead of an old woman. Louise napped in John's lap, and Frank sat by the fire, whittling a toy horse for watchful David. Perrin was cutting moccasins from leather he had tanned. Marianne and Helen on the floor murmured softly to their rag dolls. "Sing to us, Mother," Dr. Whitman urged. His wife lay down her knitting, slipped her arm around each of the girls, and began a lullaby. It was the first time Catherine had heard that beautiful, rich soprano voice, and it entranced her. "Do you like to sing, Catherine?" "Yes, ma'am, but I don't know how very well." "We must start a singing class as soon as I can manage it. Anyone can learn to sing. The Indians did when we first came here, and the doctor could not even carry a tune until I taught him. Shall we sing one together, Marcus?" "Not tonight, Mother. I have been studying you as you sit there. You look like a woman who has found the place where she belongs. The Lord knew we needed a family, so he has sent us these children. It is our duty to train them and educate them as well as we can. You cannot do that and continue to work so hard for the Indians. From now on, I want you to spend your time with the family. I'll hire someone to help with the housework so the children can have time for their study. One thing I know, I don't want anyone expecting to get them next spring." He held Matilda closer and gave her a kiss. "Nor do I, husband. Already they seem like our own." So Dr. Whitman and Mrs. Whitman are falling in love with all of the Sager kids. They don't want to give them back in the spring. Catherine leaned back against the encircling arm, feeling that love surrounding her once more. Someone wanted her. The ache that had been in her throat for so long eased a little. Elizabeth popped up straight, her eyes dancing. "You mean you won't send the boys up to the place in the north? Shimming something?" The doctor laughed heartily. You mean talk shaman? And let Mr. Walker and Mr. Els get the 2 best helpers I have come my way? I should say not. I think I'll ride over to Umatilla tomorrow, or further if I have to tell Captain Shaw to forget about next spring. Elizabeth gave a big sigh of relief. So we are all together again, all 7 of us? All 7, Mrs. Whitman repeated, looking at the sleeping baby. And that, my friends, was chapter 11.